Lacrosse, your weekly Google Hangout, where we talk about the National Lacrosse League. My name is Graeme, and with me is Tyler Fitch and Melissa Daphne. And we're going to start off today by talking about, obviously, the biggest news in the NLL in the last couple of weeks, and that would obviously be the new CBA. The league and the PLPA announced a couple of weeks ago that we have a new 7-year deal with a bunch of changes. Salaries are frozen for the first couple of years for all players. Free agency will start earlier. We have changes in the number of franchise players and a bunch of other things. I guess the biggest thing would be the salary changes. For the first 2 years, there's going to be no changes in salary, and then after that, I honestly don't know the details of how the salaries change after that, or if there's a limit. But there is a salary cap of $400,000 a year. So, Tyler, we'll start with you. What do you think about the new deal?
I like the stability that will come from having 7 years ahead of us without worrying about the players go back and forth. I think the last deal was also for 7 years. Maybe they opted out about 2 years earlier, they renegotiated early, but it's much better than having uncertainty. For the salary freezes, I'm not aware of a single player living off this money, so the salary freeze probably isn't too much of an impact in the concession the players are willing to give to the owners for stability. If guys were dependent upon the cost of living increase in order to a salary increase as a cost of living increase, I think it would have been a lot tougher fight that they would have put up. But since they all play as a supplemental way and just something they do, I think that's not a concern. That it doesn't raise any red flags to me. I think it's something the players did out of goodwill so they can play in 3 years instead of done after 2 because everybody needed too much. What about you, Melissa?
It's interesting, some of the changes they made. I don't think the salary stuff, like you said, is really going to have a huge impact, but it's definitely some of those other changes that were made, like the active roster going down from 23 to 20. I think things like that in the game day roster, I think those things are definitely going to have a huge impact. I mean, obviously the talent pool is going to be that much bigger that people are pulling from because the teams have to let more people go. Practice roster changed a little bit, but one player I don't think is going to be huge. The game day roster, I've seen those games where injuries are rampant, and so that could have some effect, but down by 2 players, I don't know that it's going to be huge. The unrestricted free agency changing could have a big impact because some of the top players actually are older, and that would actually apply to them. I don't remember if there was the ability to reject the franchise tag before. That's completely new, isn't it?
Yeah, that is new. And just for anybody watching this, we are having a few technical issues here and there where there's a bit of a lag between people, so sometimes there may be some dead air. So we're trying to avoid that and trying to minimize that as much as we can. But getting back to the CBA, yeah, the franchise player thing is new. Right now, each player has 2 franchise players that they can designate, and the reason to do that is just so that they won't hit unrestricted free agency. And those players also get I think it's 25% above the league maximum in terms of salary. In 2015, that's going down to only 1 franchise player per team, And also in 2015, a player who's given that tag can reject it. I guess the idea is if the guy actually wants to become a free agent, then and the team doesn't want him to, they would give him that tag. If he decides he's okay with the salary cut, then he can reject free agency or reject the franchise tag and become a free agent. And they're calling that the John Tavares rule. And I haven't seen a explanation as to why they would call that the John Tavares rule. Presumably, Buffalo's already given him the franchise tag for this year. I'm not sure if there's a reason why he would reject it next year, other than assuming he's playing next year, he may decide that the Bandits would be better off franchising somebody else, and therefore he would just reject it and they could franchise somebody else. But I'm not sure why they would need a rule to do that. He would just be able to talk to them. It's unlikely he wants to become a free agent and go play for somebody else at this point in his career.
Yeah, I can't imagine being with a team for as long as he has to want to retire elsewhere.
Oops. One of the other big changes that we're going to see in the CBA is, well, first of all, Minnesota's moving back to the East Division. I don't know if that's a huge deal, but it obviously changes the dynamic in the West, and that there's only 4 teams there now and 5 back in the East. But I think one of the bigger changes is the playoffs, and this is kind of an interesting one. I guess they had a lot of people complaining about the fact that 8 out of the 9 teams made the playoffs, and it kind of rendered the regular season somewhat meaningless for everybody except for that 9th team, obviously. But now only 3 teams per division are getting in, so there's only 6 out of 9. The first team gets a bye in the first week, the other 2 play, and then the division finals and the championship final are now best out of 2, which seems odd. And if the teams split the 2 games, then they play a third, what they call a 10-minute mini game. And I don't know exactly how the mini game is going to work. Is that actually going to be a third game, or is it essentially an overtime period of the second game? It's a mini game in that it's not sudden death. It's going to be, I guess, it's the winner of who scores the most in the 10 minutes.
It's my understanding it's going to be kind of like an overtime period.
What if somebody's given a game misconduct in the middle of the second game? Does that apply to the minigame? Who knows? For all we know. But the league isn't giving anybody access to the CBA. That would make more sense to me. So it seems a little strange to me that they would go for a best of 2 with this extra period rather than a best of 3, but this is the NLL, and it's not like they're going to have their choice of arenas and their choice of dates. So they might decide if we wanted to go to a best of 3, that might have to take place over the course of 3 weeks because we can't get the arenas for the dates we want. So this minimizes that possibility while still giving a longer playoff period, or a longer playoff format than just 1 game.
Yeah, if we're going to name rules, I would name this the Edmonton rule, as they have played 6, maybe 7 seasons and never had a home playoff game, but they have had a couple runs deep in the playoffs, and their fans have never been rewarded for it. They've always been a 3 or 4 seed. So no home games, despite making the playoffs. I think this is a way to alleviate that.
It's definitely interesting. I think we're probably still going to have some flack, from fans about it. But I know especially on the boards, there was a lot of people complaining the past couple seasons that the whole season was meaningless, except for 1 team that didn't make it to the playoffs. So they needed to do something. I'm glad they listened. and made some changes. I just don't know if these are the right changes.
I like the change in the sense that it's better than nothing. I'm a software developer, and we constantly thrive on change and trying stuff out, and we can thankfully fail quickly so we can have our issue worked out in a day or two, and the timeline doesn't exist in the NLL for that. But the idea that they're trying something different to see if it's better is better than doing nothing, which for the last few years they really have. They've just been doing the same thing over and over again while teams went away. And so I'm looking forward to how this will work out and seeing the results. But I think it's an experiment. It's not like a proven method. Kind of getting it from soccer. The Major League Soccer does this in their playoff structure, where they do home and a home, aggregate score combined. And for the NLL, this is different than anything we've seen in at least 10 years. It's a good move.
Yeah, I think for me the only thing that doesn't really make sense is the barn to barn, and that's simply because their cost is already a huge factor in the NLL, and I think that's going to really put a burden on some of the teams.
That could definitely be an issue there recent past, but I do remember a situation about 10 years ago when before the Mammoth was around, they were the Washington Power, and I believe it was the Power hosting the Wings in a playoff game, but the Power actually declined to host that game, and the game was played in Philadelphia because they decided they would just lose too much money if they actually hosted the game. So there have certainly been problems in the past with teams hosting games or wanting to host games, and that's assuming there's no circus in town.
I don't think they're ever going to live the circus down.
So those were the main parts of the CBA that I had written down. Another one, free agency. Right now, once you're 32, you can become a free agent, and I think there are some experience years there as well. You have to have a certain number of years in the league. Next year it'll be 31, and the year after that it'll be 30 years old. And to reject the franchise tag, you have to be 34. So I guess if you're franchising your Ryan Benesh or your young superstar, they won't be able to reject it. But once they've hit the age of 34, then they'll be able to. So there's been, once they got the CBA signed, we haven't seen an awful lot of trades. In fact, I'm not sure we've seen any since the CBA was signed. But there have been an awful lot of re-signings.
There were a few before.
Yeah, we had a number before the CBA was signed. The Ryan Benesh deal was probably the biggest. To Vancouver for Bob Snyder. I can't even remember a few others, but some of the bigger signings, there haven't been any big name players in terms of free agency. Nobody's signed with any other teams, not in terms of really big names anyway. But there's been a number of long contracts signed. I guess a lot of the teams are taking advantage of the 7-year CPA and trying to lock in some cost certainty. And John Grant was signed for 4 years, so he'll likely retire a Mammoth. Rochester signed a bunch of people, and they've signed at least 3 or 4 different 7-year contracts. Matt Vince for 5 years. They just signed Paul Dawson, I think, either today or yesterday for 4 years, and a bunch of others. And I was actually talking to Melissa before the show today, saying that the Rock hadn't really done much. They franchised Colin Doyle and they signed Casey Byrnes. And then I looked it up, and in the same article where they described how they had signed Casey Byrnes to 3 years, they had signed about 10 or 12 other players. So I guess there's only a couple of people on the Rock that they haven't re-signed. But it sounded like Rochester had been kind of the big player in that they were signing. They've signed most of their team, I think, but most of the contracts that they've signed have been for 4, 5, or 6 years or more.
Yeah, the opinion of every player as they describe Rochester owners is the greatest thing out there. So everybody wants to be locked in, to be well taken care of. And even outside of these signings, you had Cody Jamieson, when he was drafted, signed a 10-year contract with Rochester. So I think he being Stiers, likes the nucleus of the team they have, and he just wants to lock them in and go as long as they can. The one that amazes me is he's signing Craig Point to a 7-year deal, and 2 seasons ago, Point wasn't even on the team at the start. He went through training camp, didn't make the team, and then they had some injuries and other situations, and he came back to the team and basically has never left because he produces. And the idea that now they lock him in for years and years when 2 years ago he had dropped out of the league to then return is really impressive for Craig Point to pull that off.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. Sorry.
I guess the question I have about the contracts on top of this is what's guaranteed. I think these guys probably have no guaranteed money in some sports, and you could sign a guy to a 7-year contract and still cut him at training camp. So I don't know what to expect there. They're giving the idea of stability, and they want to lock these guys in, but I don't think that the teams are going to be held to any sort of responsibility for this. If it's not working out, they're going to be pretty easy to cut ties.
I believe you're right. I seem to remember having a similar
Ooh, are you on
conversation
mute,
with
Graeme?
Teddy Jenner over Twitter last year. I don't think so. I don't know if you can't hear me, but I had a
No, you
similar
weren't. Sorry,
conversation last year
it was a video
where
lag.
contracts are not guaranteed. Okay. Contracts are not guaranteed, and I think there's basically rules in the CBA that say if you're going to training camp, you have to have a contract. So they'll sign a bunch of people just so they can go to training camp. No, obviously they're not signing Sid Smith just so he can go to training camp. He's going to be part of the team. But a lot of the signings that you see don't really mean an awful lot. If it's a multi-year deal, then likely they're going to be on the team, and that's what the team is going for. But if they sign, Joe Rookie, who played 1 year, to a 1-year contract, it's not unlikely that they're doing that so that he can go to training camp. And like you said, if he doesn't perform at training camp, they can cut him, and that's the end of it.
That's my understanding too about the contracts, that in order for them to even show up for the training camps and stuff, they have to have some kind of a contract.
So among all of the signings with players returning for another year, we've also got a bunch of players who will not be returning next year. The biggest name, and maybe this is because I'm a Rock fan and so I'm biased, but I'd say the biggest name is probably Blaine Manning, who after 12 years, all with the Rock, has called it a career. He'll be joining the team as an assistant coach, assistant to the new head coach John Lovell. Another possible, I haven't actually seen an announcement of this, but I did confirm with him over Twitter. Phil Sanderson said that he is unlikely to ever play lacrosse again, or at least at the pro level. Now, he didn't play for the Rock last year anyway. He did play the previous year, and near the end of the season, received a head injury of some sort. I don't remember how it happened, but he was concussed, and we all know about how damaging those can be. And so he never played last year, and he's pretty much called it a career. So there's, well, one definite huge blow to the Rock. As I said, Sanderson didn't play last year anyway. But another couple, John Harrison from the Bandits, Nolan Hevener from the Roughnecks, and another notable one would be Jimmy Quinlan from the Rush, who's been their captain for a few years now, and has played all ends of the floor. He's been an offensive guy, he's been a transition guy, he's been a defensive guy, he's been a respected leader. So that's going to be quite a blow to the Edmonton team.
I'm sad to see Quinlan go. He's really fun. He just loved playing. First time I ever met him was in Portland at the 07 All-Star game. And they're going through and they're offering autographs. And by face, I had no idea who he was. I was just like, and sorry, who are you? He goes, I'm the Edmonton guy. Like, every team gets one, and I'm the guy who they sent down. It's like, all right. They were, I think, they were second-year team at that point, so they didn't have any established stars, but he was, because he was from Edmonton, and he really took pride in that. He was great to watch compete, always.
Yeah, I think the fact that Manning is retiring actually is kind of a big deal because he didn't he have a pretty good season last year, Graeme? Am I confusing him with someone else?
It wasn't bad. In terms of numbers, if you're looking at his numbers, it was easily his worst, but his role kind of changed. The season before last, I think it was the first or second game of the season, he broke his collarbone, and so he was out for most of the rest of the season. And when he came back, he was not the same player. And then last year, he was certainly not the same player. He was in a different role a bit last year. He wasn't crashing the net. He wasn't like one of the top offensive guys. He was more setting the picks and doing the dirty work and allowing other people to get clear shots at the net. And Garrett Billings certainly took full advantage of that. But his numbers dropped like a rock. But again, that wasn't his role. But it did seem a number of times last year that every now and again he'd see a pass to the net and he'd try to get through it, and he used to be able to do it and he just couldn't do it anymore. So I think there were certainly times when he would do something like that, get caught, not be able to score, and on his way back to the bench you could see the frustration on his face. It was just, I used to be able to do that and now I can't. And I think that got to him, and he decided, I can't do this anymore. So yeah, it was kind of sad to see that one injury basically ended it. Oh, looks like we lost Melissa. Okay, Melissa's having some trouble
Yeah,
with her
a
audio.
ruffling of the mic, she disappears.
That was pretty much all I had. That was pretty much all I had on my list of stuff to talk about. Tyler, was there anything else that you wanted to mention?
Is there anything from the draft that interested you, Graeme? You were there.
I was there. Yeah, I didn't really. I don't really follow the Ontario or the BC summer leagues very much. I kind of pay a bit of attention here and there. I don't know the players nearly as well as the NLL. So there were certainly some players that were drafted that were well known in MSL circles or WLA circles, but I didn't know who they were. So I really don't. I don't have much to say about the players that were drafted, I'm afraid. Oops. Melissa, you back yet? No, we still don't have Melissa, it sounds like. Yeah, I guess another lacrosse event that's happened since the last time we recorded, which was quite some time ago, was the Mann Cup, which happened out in Victoria. And I paid a little bit of attention to that. I watched a couple of games online. Tyler, were you paying more attention to that than I was?
Yes, so I was actually able to schedule some vacation time and head up to BC, and not too many better ways to spend a week in Victoria in September. It was an incredible experience. I've been to a game with the Bear Mountain before. The Bear Mountain Arena is where they play their home games, and this was absolutely a packed arena, which numbers-wise isn't huge, but when it's standing room only and it's everybody there almost is cheering for the home team, and you can see the Six Nations chief come out and battle really hard against Victoria. It was an incredible experience. It was my first time going to Mann Cup games. 2 years ago, I had gone to the Langley-Brampton series, so she had seen some of that, but not in the packed arena. Just the way these guys have to go about it, multiple games back to back. We were there 5 nights and watched 4 games, and we didn't even see the first 2. It was incredible. Some of the best action I've ever seen. But the thing I learned about the game is it really came down to fundamentals. Even at that high level, the 2 best teams in Canada, the fundamentals of getting to the loose balls first won the whole series basically for Six Nations. They also saw the wildest thing I've ever seen with both Brendan Miller and Evan Kirk getting kicked out for illegal equipment in Game 5 of that series, I believe, and Colin Doyle running the locker room to start putting on gear. And the report was that he'd played hockey and played goalie goalie and hockey at some points. So that was like the extent of his goalie experience. But without hesitation, he knew his team needed him, and he just ran back, put on the gear, and just hunkered down for 10 minutes. And at that same time, you saw some players like Rory Smith, who was just like, I don't have a real goalie behind me, and he was sitting in front of as many shots as he could to even stop stop Colin from having to make saves on top of that. So the teamwork, those guys were all on the same page, same mission, and it was a really, really fun lacrosse experience. They alternate every year between the Ontario and BC, so our goal is to go up every other year now and watch. So I got 2 years till my next Mann Cup experience. But for a team going through a 7-game series where in the NLL there's never series, for games like during the regular season, and they have some history, but never a series where they're just going back and forth. It was incredible. Well recommended. If you can schedule some vacation time, put it in September.
I was lucky enough last year to be able to take in a game at in Peterborough with the Lakers and the Langley Thunder, and I only saw game one, um, but yeah, that was some pretty amazing lacrosse, and whilst the game, I remember thinking they have the Mann Cup here in Ontario every other year, and I've been to exactly one other game, which was in Brampton in about 2003 or 4 or something. But that's it. And I asked myself a number of times during that game, why don't I do this every year? Now Peterborough is a 2.5-hour drive away from me, so when they're having a game on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night, that's tough to do. But I will certainly make more of an effort next year to make sure I get out to as many games as I can. I think, especially since I think the Mann Cup tickets were maybe $10 or $5 or some crazy thing. So when you're paying $40 for a typical rock game, and you can see a Mann Cup game for less than half of that price, it should be a no-brainer.
Exactly.
So we
I'm
may
jealous
have
of both
Melissa
of you
back
guys
now.
being
Melissa,
able to
are you
actually
around?
go to some of the Mann Cups.
Yeah, Melissa, you're even for summer act further away than I am.
Okay, was
so
there
make it a
Melissa? Did you have
destination.
anything else that you want to
Something you
talk
got to
about?
plan for, but I think you can be well rewarded.
Yeah, I definitely want to. I keep planning that I'm going to go up to like Victoria or something and, just hit a bunch of the games. I had an opportunity a few years ago because there was a business conference that was right there. And if I extended my trip a couple days, I could have hit 5 games that week. I was just ecstatic to go. And then I didn't get to go.
Okay, I guess if there's nothing else that you guys want to talk about, I guess we can end the show here. Whoops. You guys still there?
Yeah, I hear you now.
You want to talk about what we expect for the next season? Who we think might make the team? Who might get traded?
I'm not sure. I think training camps are just only a couple weeks away. If maybe even this weekend. I don't know. So I'm very excited to see what starts happening.
Yeah, the Rock has announced that they're going to have 3 preseason games at their Oakville training facility, which is just west of Toronto, which is good for me because it's about halfway to the ACC for me, so I can be there in 20 minutes. So they're going to be playing 3 games. Now I think about it. Rochester's announced a couple of games, a couple of preseason games as well, and Buffalo. I don't know if any of the Western teams will be playing preseason games out there. Do you guys know?
I haven't heard anything for the Mammoth yet.
I haven't heard. Yeah. The same. I think the stealth setup in Langley is kind of like the Toronto Rocket Center in Oakville, where they've got the main arena. They have a side, like smaller in those seats, but it's got the full turf. I think we'll see Edmonton and Calgary probably do a camp there in the same way that we'll go to the Iroquois Lacrosse Arena or the Toronto Center for their camps. And if a scrimmage comes out of it, I don't know. I haven't seen anything. But I definitely think we'll see some teams in close proximity to each other and just sharing floor time. Well, alternating floor time, really.
Yeah, I know last year Mammoth fans were kind of upset because we really didn't get a preseason game because all of them that they did were elsewhere. We've gotten a little spoiled. We've had at least a few every season.
Well, I'm certainly spoiled living close to the track. In that the Rock, like I said, will have 3 games there. I'm pretty sure the Swarm are basing their preseason out of the track as well, and I think the Wings played at least one game. I think there was a Wings Bandits game at the track last year as well. So a bunch of teams are playing either at the track or at the Iroquois Lacrosse Arena, which is the same distance in the other direction from my place. So I'm rather lucky that way. I may get to see a number of preseason games from a number of different teams.
Well, we hope you take advantage of that for those of us that cannot.
Yeah, I'm definitely jealous of kind of everyone over in that little section that you're near Rochester and, Banditland, and a little bit of a drive you might be able to go to Philly and just see all those games. And then, of course, we're all spoiled compared to Fitch, who lost his team.
I've never been to Philadelphia, but I've
Yeah, I was
seen
just talking about it
a
last
couple
night.
in
I don't
Rochester.
even know what stage of.
True.
Yeah, my wife and I were talking last night as we were coming home, and I'm just like, we don't even know where we are with the stealth. We're trying to figure out, like, denial. It's like we've been going to games for 9 years. This is our 10th year, and it would have been our 10th year. And we'll still go to games, and we don't have any problem going to games. It's just coming home. It's 6-hour drive home is the only thing that's stopping us from going to every single game still. You can put an airport next to Langley, and we'll make it. Then we'll get up there easy.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, I think the farthest somebody here might have to drive, or well, that I know does drive, is up from Colorado Springs. And that's, I think, maybe 4 hours.
seems that the lagging is getting worse because I'm starting to get long delays between conversations here. So maybe it's a good time to end this episode, and maybe we'll try again in a week or two and see what else has happened in the world of the National Lacrosse League. We have a website called addictedtolacrosse.com yet, but links to each of the episodes will go up there. The episodes should be available on YouTube shortly after we finish recording. And so I'll make sure I put the link up there. And there are ways on there to contact each of us. And I think the easiest way for all three of us would be Twitter. My handle is Graeme Perro, which is GraemePerro. And if I was clever, I would be able to put that up on the screen, except it doesn't want to do that for me now. So anyway, addictedtolacrosse.com, that's where you can find it. Melissa is at Snow Kitten, and Tyler is at Stealth Dragon. They have much more interesting handles than I do. And I guess that will be it for this week. You guys have any final comments?
Hopefully we'll have lots more to talk about in the very near future.
Bring on training camp.
Oops. Okay, thanks guys. And